With regard to the report on the District Reapportionment Commission regarding establishment of voting districts for the election of the Board of Aldermen. The first part of this is going to just be the incorporation of exhibits from the hearings held by the Redistricting Commission on January 8th, January 14th, 22nd, and 28th, 2015. I believe Attorney Casagrande has the list. They're on the website. But if we could entertain a motion to incorporate those exhibits.
Like that. They were just referred to the charter revision.
Made by Alderman Brunelli, seconded by Alderman Giacchetti. Is there any discussion? Alderman DePillo.
Yes, Board President Prinaruski. On Monday, I had specifically asked Corporation Counsel regarding the request to provide a map with the overlay of what is known as the Butler Plan with what is known as the Morrison Plan. I was told by Corporation Counsel that that map had been generated by our map department here in the city of Waterbury, and that it would be hanging on the wall this evening with the other two maps. When I asked Mr. Casagrande, he said nobody requested it of them. This is supposed to be a fair public hearing, and I would like to know why I was told.
Alderman, the motion on the floor right now is to incorporate the exhibits from the commission hearing.
An exhibit should be.
Let's get through that
and
portion.
Mr. President, you asked about discussion. An exhibit should be the overlay, which we were told was going to be produced.
There is an exhibit that's an overlay that's going to be given out tonight.
And is it on the Etzel out there?
We'll talk about what's on the Etzels in a minute, but right now we're just incorporating exhibits in. The exhibits will be handed out. So let's get through that portion of it, then we can talk about what's on the Etzels, okay? With that, the motion having been made and seconded, is there further discussion? Attorney Casagrande, do you have the list of exhibits that we're incorporating? If you give them to the sheriff, he'll hand them out.
I have 17 copies of the exhibit list, which is exhibits 1 through 32. Exhibits 30 through 32 I'll be actually handing up in a minute. And I also have website exhibits 1 through 11. So with the President's permission, I'd like to hand up copies of those lists.
Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
Does it even have a different list?
I think this is what they're going to put up there.
Here, Mike.
I don't know. Thanks, man.
No, you got it.
Does everybody have one? Okay. All right, so then the motion would be to incorporate all of these exhibits into the record of the public hearing this evening. Is there any discussion as far as the incorporation of these exhibits? Hearing none, then a yes vote would be to incorporate the exhibits. A no vote would be not to incorporate them. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The motion carries. The exhibits are incorporated. All right, Alderman DePillo, you had a point you wanted to make?
Yes, Mr. President. The public tonight spent some time reviewing the two maps. Unfortunately, they were not given the benefit of what I was told was produced by the map department here in the city of Waterbury. And that was the third map, the overlay map. The map that had been requested by the commission, that was never provided to them. They were ignored. And I was told that map was produced, and that map would be here tonight, on the wall. Not on the screen where you can't see it, not in a PDF file where you have to go on your computer and print it, on the wall with the other two maps so that the public could see exactly where the two maps varied as far as the overlay went. And that's what this public hearing is about. So people know what their districts looked like or could look like. And that has been withheld from them this evening. And I want to know why it's been withheld.
Was the overlay map put on the website, or where was that overlay map done? If you don't, yeah, well, you want to just come up if you know.
Good evening, Linda Wibby. I did send it to you, the president.
Yep.
I received it in a PDF. I did not receive a large one. I did receive 2 large copies of the other 2 maps, which were posted this afternoon. But I did not get a large copy of the overlay map.
Okay. But is the overlay on the website? Did it get posted on the website? Do you know?
I didn't check myself.
Okay.
It was not.
It was not yet. It was
Okay.
not yet posted on the. We usually post after presented, but I did send it downstairs. I did not check myself to see if it got posted.
Okay.
So therefore, Mr. President,
Do you have, what would you propose then, Alderman?
I would propose that the city produce the map. There was no reason why they produced 2 maps, and yet they have the
I know,
PDF.
without the commentary, though, what is it that you would propose that we do? The maps are here tonight for the exhibits. I believe it's exhibit number 30, if you look at the list. So that's here for us. I don't know what...
Are all the
put on the
exhibits,
screen.
is the overlay maps enough copies available to the public?
And again, Mr. President, I did indicate that we would have a computer that could drill down and try to make that available for any of the maps, which is the same information, just one on top of the other. I think you can drill down on it.
Well, I'll leave that up to the public as to whether or not, before they get up to the microphone and start speaking, they get the opportunity to look at the overlay of the 2 districts, so at least they're going to know if they have a question to speak to what they're pointing to.
What is it that you propose we do? Would you like to?
Well, right now,
would you like to put the overlay up on the screen, and we'll recess for about 10 minutes and let people take a look at it?
I'd appreciate it, yes.
Okay. Then why don't we just...
Mr. President, may I make
Alderman
a
Phelan?
suggestion? Could we, in course of the recess, as long as the thing is available, can we have copies made?
Yep.
So
we'll
that
have
not
copies.
everybody is running around the screen trying to
We'll
find
have
it?
copies made as well. So we'll do the copies, we'll get it up on the screen, we'll take 10 minutes, and then we'll come back. How's that?
Yes.
All right?
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll stand down for 10 minutes. We'll be back at 7 o'clock. We turn to the regular order of business, which now is the public hearing and the public comments. So anyone who wishes to address the board with respect to the proposals from the Redistricting Commission, please sign up with the City Sheriff, Mr. Conway. When you come up to speak, please state your name and address for the record so that the clerk will have it. And there's a 5-minute limit. I will give you 1 minute heads up when you have 1 minute left. Mr. Sheriff, if you call the first speaker.
First speaker tonight from 62 Avalon.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did you had additional? Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I just thought it might be more efficient if I handed up copies of the exhibits that I'd like to put into the record.
30, 31, and 32?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Actually, I have, for the convenience of the board, I have copies of Dr. Morrison's draft Plan 3, I've got 17 copies of those. I have 17 copies of the Butler plan, which actually it's the Butler plan which Dr. Morrison drew in street lines on, so that may be more helpful to the board to understand. And then I have Exhibit 30 is the overlay map that we have been discussing. I've got 17 copies of those. My associate also has several extra copies for members of the public. I don't think I have enough for everyone in the public, but we have several available. That plan was submitted, my understanding to you, Mr. Chairman, and then distributed to the members of the board in a PDF form so that, and it was Dr. Morrison's understanding that the PDF form could be enlarged so that people could look at it and help them understand the overlay a little bit better. In fact, the PDF may even be superior to the overlay that's on the screen before you. That I would hand up as Exhibit 30. Exhibit 31 is a copy of my PowerPoint presentation, which I will defer until later in the proceeding pursuant to the chairman's discretion. And Exhibit 32 is Dr. Morrison's handout, which he will discuss either later in the hearing or in the special meeting, where he compares the demographics of his plan to Mr. Butler's plan. So I would respectfully hand those up to the board.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, if I may, I haven't met all of the members of the board, but just, my name is Dan Casagrande. I'm a lawyer with Kramer & Anderson. With me tonight is my associate Abigail Miranda and Dr. Peter Morrison, the city's demographic expert. And I just wanted to say that it's a privilege to be able to represent the town, the city in this matter. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, then. Ready to go? Why don't you call the first speaker then?
First speaker from 62 Avalon Circle, Richard Wood.
Richard Wood, 62 Avalon Circle, Waterbury. It looks like we have some enthused people here tonight. I see some ministers, which are always good to see that. I will have to be on our best behavior and no political maneuvering tonight. The core thing that we're seeing tonight is democracy in action. A few months ago, we had the exhibits of the Magna Carta in the UK, the beginnings of democracy, you might say. At our last meeting, we had about 15 or 20 of us in here discussing the maps, which seem to have taken hold. And in the rear of the building, we had 200 new Americans looking to see how democracy worked and looking to participate in the process. And here tonight, we are continuing that process by deciding how we're going to elect some officials. A few weeks ago, the Board of Education put the Muslim holidays on the school schedule. This is the full circle of the diversity and the magic of democracy. To see the melting pot work, to see it come to conclusions, and to see progress made. And I think tonight we're going to enjoy some more aspects of democracy by having people speak, let us know what they think, and what they want us to do. Thank you very much.
Next speaker from 180 Macaulay Avenue, Lydell Brown.
Lydell Brown, 180 Macaulay Avenue. To our elected officials, the Honorable Mayor Neil O'Leary, the President and Board of Aldermen Paul Penarewski, and to the rest of our honored and trusted members who make up our Board of Aldermen. Again, my name is Lydell Brown. I am a 30-year resident of this great city called Waterbury. I am also a homeowner and a taxpayer. I have raised 3 daughters in the Waterbury school system. I have been a pastor in the city for 21 years. During that time, I was blessed with the vision of starting a non-denominational multicultural church named Burning Bush Family Life Center. I have been the president of the Concerned Black Clergy Council, which consists of 11 other pastors for the past 13 years, where our focus is access for the African American community. I am a former member of the executive board of the Waterbury Democratic Town Committee, and lastly, a member of the Waterbury NAACP. The reason I stand before you this evening is to first thank the Waterbury District Reapportionment Commission, Dr. Morrison, Larry Butler, for your hard work and your tireless efforts you have put into representing the city and the neighborhoods. They need your support and your compassion. But with that said, I am also disappointed. Why? Because the goal of redistricting is to provide fair and effective representation for all. But this plan dilutes the African American vote in areas where there are clusters of African American voters. The 14th Amendment of the United States says that we're supposed to be treated fairly when it comes to our vote. So I want to go on record. Don't pass this plan. Send it back to the table and come back with a better plan. Lastly, I want to speak into your future. Do any of you want your legacy to be that the Waterbury Board of Aldermen had a great opportunity to do something historic, but you found yourself stacking, cracking, and packing areas of Waterbury? In closing, I would like to leave you with a thought from ACLU. Where voting is racially polarized, that is, where white voters tend to withhold support from candidates preferred by minority voters often cannot attain effective representation within the context of an at-large election. Electoral districts are drawn on the principle that within these large jurisdictions, there exist smaller communities of people who live in close proximity and who share common social and political interests. In some jurisdictions, particularly those with significant race and our language minority communities, single-member voting districts facilitate a greater connection between an elected official and his or her constituency that would, at large system, not work. So tonight, I know there's been pressure put on you, lots of pressure, but we're asking you to do something historic. Send it back. Send it back. People voted. They said they want an alderman by district. Let's make it work. Let's make it work. Thank you.
Next speaker from 475 Washington Avenue, Thelma Walker.
Good evening. I'm Thelma Walker, 475 Washington Avenue, Waterbury, Connecticut. I cannot support any plan that dilutes the voting strength of the African Americans. Therefore, I oppose both of the plans that are being considered. Thank you.
Next speaker from 405 Wilson Street, Anessa Kelly.
Good evening. My name is Anissa Kelly, 405 Wilson Street, Waterbury, Connecticut, and I also cannot support any plan that dilutes the voting strength of the African Americans. Therefore, I oppose both the plans that are being considered. Thank you.
Next speaker from 405 Wilson Street, Maurice Kelly.
Good evening, ladies, gentlemen, Mr. Chairman. My name is Maurice Kelly. I reside at 405 Wilson Street, Waterbury, Connecticut. And I also cannot support any plans that dilutes the voting rights or the voting strength of the African Americans. Therefore, I oppose both of the plans that are being considered here this evening. Thank you.
Next speaker from 137 Dwight Street, Mr. and Mrs. Danielle Pastor. Oh, okay. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
Mr. and Mrs. Passmore, 137 Dwight Street, Waterbury, Connecticut.
We also oppose the map the way it's currently drawn, and we would hope that you can reconsider and take another look at it. Thank you very much.
Next speaker from 36 Camp Street, Jerome Davis.
My name is Jerome Davis, and this is my son Joshua Davis. This is his first town hall meeting, and he would like to say something, right?
It's not fair that you're changing our districts.
Go ahead, just this way the tape will pick you up. Go ahead, start again.
Let's say.
It's not fair that you're changing our districts.
All right. That's it. All right. And as I said, my name is Jerome Davis. We reside at 36 Camp Street, and I cannot support any plan that would disenfranchise any voter in the city of Waterbury. Thank you.
Next speaker for 50 Wachovia Avenue, Joy Coifoy.
Hi, I'm Joe Foy for 50 Walking Avenue, and I am not support any plan that disputes the voting strength of the African Americans. Therefore, I oppose both of the plans now to be considered. Thank you, and have a good day.
Next speaker from 342 Willow Street, Tory Moore.
Tori Moore, 342 Willow Street. I want to thank everyone for their support, for their efforts. And I also think that it's important for this plan to be effective for all African Americans, and one that does not dilute the voting strength. So therefore, I also oppose the plans that are being considered.
Next speaker from 173 Wilkes Street, Ruth Ann Barnett.
Good evening. I am Ruth Ann Barnett from 173 Wilkes Street. I cannot support any plan that dilutes the voting strength of the African Americans. Therefore, I oppose both of the plans that are being considered. Thank you.
Next speaker from 50 Wacona Avenue, Melissa Foy.
Hello, my name is Melissa Foy from 50 Wacona Ave. I cannot support any plan that dilutes the voting strength of the African Americans. Therefore, I oppose both plans that are being considered. God bless.
Next speaker from 49 Sherman Avenue, Tiffany White.
Good evening. My name is Tiffany White from 46 Sharon Avenue. I cannot support any dilute of voting strength of African American. Therefore, I oppose both plans that are being considered. Thank you.
Next speaker is Pastor Melinda Moore.
Pastor Melinda Moore, 249 Raymond Street, Waterbury, Connecticut. I do appreciate the effort that has been made, but I cannot support any plan that dilutes the voting strength of the African Americans. Therefore, I also oppose both of the plans that are being considered. Thank you.
Next speaker from 249 Raymond Street, Reverend Royal Moore.
Good evening, everyone. I would like to thank everybody for all the efforts that have been made by those that are on the Board of Aldermen, but I am sorry, so sorry to say that I cannot support any plan that would dilute the strength of the black voter in the city of Waterbury. I believe that this was developed because there was a need for the Board of Aldermen, but I believe it should have been built upon a fair process, and some things need to change here in the city of Waterbury. I've been born and raised here in the city of Waterbury. I'm 54 years old. I lived in the city of Waterbury for 52 of those years. I'm a 22-year alumni of the Waterbury Boys Club. I've worked in the community of Waterbury with outreach for 21 years in ministry. Worked with the Morris Foundation for several years, and I am dedicated to all citizens of the city of Waterbury. But something is not fair for one race is not fair for all. So I cannot support neither of the plans that were proposed. Thank you for your time.
Next speaker from 107 Citizens Avenue, Ruben Rodriguez.
Ruben Rodriguez from 107 Citizens Avenue, chairman of the Latino National Republican Coalition. I want to talk to you guys because a lot of people today are saying that they don't support none of the plans, but the time is ticking, and we need to choose one. And if we would have been to choose one, and the right one would have been the plan one that Dr. Morris put in. But as everybody came in, that's one community, and said that that plan was not going to go, then they came out with the idea of having these two plans together. They're the similar ones planned, and my support for the Morris plan is because if we have somebody to represent us when there's a lawsuit, that is going to be a lawsuit, because this is being seen by nationally people, organizations that are national, that are people that are going to be watching this real carefully, minority organizations especially, that are going to be looking at this really carefully. And if I want to choose somebody to represent us, it will be Dr. Morris, because he's been here, he's done it before, he's a guy that done it nationally, so he knows all the stuff that has to be done. And I'm not going to be paying more taxpayers' money to come back again and redo this again, and to have this done all over again with people that have houses that are paying too much taxes today and day, and have all these people come out and say that they want to go this all over again. This is not right for none of those maps. I'm telling you right now, if we have to open your minds, because there's only a map that is really, and both maps are really similar to each other. And I'm a Latino. I know that we have representation in those both maps equally. So my thing to you guys is, and in your minds is, who's going to represent us in a lawsuit? And I think I will go with Dr. Morris right here before anything else. Thank you so much.
Next speaker from 49 Landon Street, Willie Dennis.
Hi, my name is Eleanor Dennis, and I'm from 49 Landon Street in Waterbury.
Yes, my name is Willie Dennis, and I'm from 49 Landon Street in Waterbury. I cannot support any plan that dilutes the voting strength of African Americans. Therefore, I oppose both plans that are being considered. Thank you.
Next speaker is from 270-A Austin Road, Tina Harrison.
Good evening. My name is Tina Harrison. I live at 270 Austin Road. I cannot support any plan that dilutes the voting strength of African Americans. Therefore, I oppose both plans that are being considered. Thank you.
Next speaker from 35 Newport Drive, Vernon Barnes.
Good evening. Verlin Barnes of 35 Newport Drive, Waterbury, Connecticut. I cannot support any plan that dilutes the voting strength of the African Americans. Therefore, I oppose both of the plans that are being considered. Thank you.
Next speaker from 1844 East Main Street, Pamela Hughes.
Good evening, everyone. Pamela Hughes, 1844 East Main Street. I want to go on the record. There's a couple of things that I do want to say, but I want to go on the record to say that I cannot support either plan that dilutes the African American vote. I do believe that the first plan that came out was the right plan for the African Americans, actually, and the Latinos, if you really look at it. However, we got caught up in the emotional part of it, worrying about incumbency and all of those other things, and so we missed it. But I cannot support, I oppose any plan because I don't feel good about that. I don't feel good about leaving this because I'm not going to live forever. And I want the highest voting ability for the African Americans. Now, I also want to just say this, is that we're having some real big trouble in the city with the sidewalks. And my question to the Board of Aldermen, and I need your help, we need your help.
You know, I don't mean to cut you off or to be rude, Reverend, but this is a public hearing just for one issue, so
Okay.
when we have a regular meeting, you can come and talk about the sidewalks.
Okay.
We'd be happy to hear it.
Well, I oppose the plan, and thank you so much, but I would like for you to do the sidewalks. Thank you.
Next speaker, from 131 Garden Circle, Rodney Wade.
Good evening. I'm Pastor Rodney D. Wade. I serve as the Vice President of the Concerned Black Clergy here in the city of Waterbury. I have been at every commission meeting, and they have done a wonderful job. The commissioners did a wonderful job. But at the end of the day, it just didn't sit well with me when we looked at the numbers. And any type of diluting of the vote for the African Americans, we believe that every group has to make a sacrifice. But when we look at those plans, we believe that the African American community is making the greatest sacrifice for it to work for everyone. And we don't believe that that's fair. If it's going to be fair, then all of the stakeholders have to be willing to make a sacrifice. Therefore, we reject both plans, and we ask that you would go back, take another look, so that it would be fair for everyone in the city of Waterbury. And I think that's only right. I think everyone in here loves the city, but I'm sitting in a room with Democrats, Republicans, and they all have issues. They all have interests. That doesn't take away from the fact that they love the city. And that's what we're saying on tonight. We don't believe that both plans are fair to the African American community, and we want you to take another look at it. Thank you.
Next speaker, from 380 Hickok Road, Anthony DeGennaro.
The name is Anthony DeGennaro at 380 Hitchcock Road. I have an academic interest in how small towns in Connecticut operate. I've attended all of the Charter Revision Commissions, the last three Charter Revision Commission meetings, and I attended all of the meetings that in this final phase. So let me give you a small recap of the maps. The first map that came out, all of the maps, by the way, were based on the Voting Rights Act and the parameters set by the Justice Department in Washington. The first map put emphasis on protecting you people, the incumbents. And to my astonishment, when they ran it up a flagpole, everybody shot it down, including people who were on the Board of Aldermen, which is commendable of you, to putting the governance of this town ahead of your own private political interests. The second one was met with some opposition because it broke up some of the neighborhoods. Those two maps, maps numbers 2 and 3, put emphasis on keeping the communities, the neighborhoods together. The second map had sections that broke up some of those neighborhoods. So we came to the third map. And Mr. Casagrande, who isn't exactly an associate with loophole fine print and finagle, but well versed in this material all over the country. And Mr. Morrison, who's not a graduate student with a high-powered calculator, knew what they were doing. And they worked very hard at the second map to try to solve that problem with the Manor Avenue section of Waterbury and some others. And they just found that if they started shifting things around, they would run into trouble with the Voting Rights Act. Then Mr. Butler appeared. And Mr. Butler felt that it would be much simpler if we just stuck with the state breakdowns of the districts, for the districts. That's not simple, because we would then lose some control over this, giving it to the state. As of now, part of one of our districts is in Middlebury. So they wanted to go back to a 10-year previous map. The second problem we had, he had was that, and he could speak for himself, was the changing of the voting sites. And the people who are responsible for that here in City Hall said there was no way they could possibly tell you how many sites would have to be changed until they actually had a map. One of the things Mr. Casagrande said at the last meeting, I believe, was that no one ever spoke about us and them throughout this whole process, whether it be the Charter Revision Commission, the commission that was set up to draw up the maps, and that changed tonight. And it's very disturbing. I thought Waterbury had put that behind them a long, long time ago. Folks, map 3 is not perfect, but neither are we. So it is the best offer that we've had to present. And I am very, very proud of the way it's all worked out. And I'm surprised, knowing the history of Waterbury and politics. I kept waiting for a monkey wrench to get thrown in, and it hasn't happened. And everybody acted in the highest regard for the city and for all of us. Thank you very much.
Next speaker from 41 Pilgrim Ave, Jimmy Griffin.
President of the board, members of the board, ladies, gentlemen. When I stood before you, when you put the first plan up, I was, I guess, the lone person that supported the first plan. Not because the first plan was one that I agreed with totally, but I agreed with one thing on that first plan. And that was the 2 districts that you set aside under the Voting Rights Act that was supposed to be prescribed for this whole process. We left that and we went off into some tantrum somewhere, and we got lost in the sauce. I think we have 3 districts besides those 2 districts that you could do anything you want with. But those 2 districts that were put out in the beginning were put out for a reason, because that's the required percentage in those districts under the Voting Rights Act that Mr. Morrison so specified. Mr. Morrison also alluded to some community or leaders. I don't know who they are, and I haven't heard who they are and if they've been identified yet. And whether anybody was speaking for the black community, I guess I could just say I'm speaking for the black community because nobody else has. And tonight, and speaking for the black community, Mr. Morrison, I don't recall anyone from the black community that said that they didn't agree with the first plan. I don't know where that came from. I'm concerned because your argument that you say you're going to use in court is based on support from minority leaders. I don't know who they are, I don't know where they came from, and I don't know what the pretext was, but I don't see any of them. And I haven't heard from any of them. And therefore, if that's what you were going to use to support your argument in court, then you just lost. And you know, so let's just back up and get right. We've been doing this for a long time. And the reason we're doing this was because African Americans and Latinos in the city of Waterbury have been disenfranchised forever. And you mean to tell me we have an opportunity on the 50th anniversary of Selma to do something right, now you're here from the people. You heard it from the people. You heard it from the African American community. Just listen for a change. Thank you.
Next speaker from 70 Deerwood Lane, Renee Cora.
Hello, my name is Renee Correa, 70 Deerwood Lane. I've lived in Waterbury for about 25 years. This is my first time being in a meeting like this. It's very educational, a little disheartening. I've lived here for 25 years. I can't help but notice that our most busted neighborhoods happen to be predominantly black. I can't help but notice that the city in the 25 years I've been here doesn't seem to have changed much, and that's very disappointing. I still see people of color behind the 8 ball. I still see that we don't get the representation that we need. So I'm here because obviously the people of color in this room have a problem with both plans. Something's wrong. We need to go back to the drawing board. We need to do something that benefits everybody, where no one feels like they're not represented. We all pay plenty of taxes. We should all get our fair representation. So I'm with everybody else. We need to go back and do this right. Thank you.
Next speaker from 14 Stanrod Avenue, Robert Goodrich.
Good evening. Robert Goodrich, 14 Stanrod Avenue. I'm here on behalf of the Greater Waterbury branch of the NAACP, and I have a message from James Monroe. The NAACP doctrine is that of one person, of one vote. This doctrine mandates that each election district for particular legislative bodies contain an equal number of citizens, prohibits plans that lead to voter dilution per Section 2 of the Voter Rights Act, prohibits voting procedure changes that would be made and lead to retrogression in the position of racial minorities with respect to their effective exercise of the electoral franchise per Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, and if followed, will ensure that each individual's vote is given equal weight in the electoral process. More specifically, this doctrine prohibits these 3 practices of redistricting as it concerns minority voters. First is cracking. This is drawing district lines so that an area of concentrated minority population, which is large enough for separate representation and that could constitute one or more majority minority or majority black districts, is divided and spread among several districts that are predominantly white. The second is packing. This is drawing district lines so that the minority population is over-concentrated or packed into election districts. The third is stacking. Drawing district lines so that a large minority population concentration is included with a larger white population with the purpose or effect of depriving minority voters of a voting majority. If you so are inclined, take these suggestions from the national NAACP doctrine on redistricting and use them as a guide when you are voting, as to make sure your decision provides the maximum value for each individual's vote. And if that means sending it back for more review, then so be it. Respectfully submitted, James Monroe, President of the Greater Waterbury branch of the NAACP.
Next speaker from 70 Blackman Road, State Representative Larry Butler.
Good evening, President Pernerluski, honorable members of the Board of Aldermen. My name is Larry Butler. I reside at 70 Blackman Road. And I just wanted to come forward today and thank all the members of the Charter Revision Committee that came together and actually did hard work to come up with a plan in the first place. I'd like to thank you, the Board of Aldermen, who actually took their plan and decided to put it before the residents in this city. Because I know some of you weren't really crazy about the idea, but you actually put it in front of the voters to let them weigh in. I'd like to thank the voters, the over 9,000 people who came out to support it at the ballot to help it pass. And then going forward, I'd like to thank the 8 members of the Reapportionment Committee that actually came through and actually came up with 2 plans. I think if all the members there, they probably would have narrowed it down for you to one to make your job just a little bit easier, but that didn't happen. But I believe that you're fully capable of handling this situation. I've served with some of you. I know a lot of you. I know you're capable, all of you. I had the good fortune to be able to develop a plan to put before the reapportionment and now before you for your consideration. Some people might have a problem referring it to the Butler plan. Let's just call it the Waterbury plan. Maybe that's might be a little bit more acceptable. But I think that it accomplishes all of what was charged by the charter revision in terms of 5 equal districts closely following the state representative lines. There's really no state input. When they draw the lines, it'll be new city districts, okay? And I think that the plan that was developed will achieve that. Now, I must say that the city hired Attorney Casagrande and Dr. Morrison, and they have adapted a plan based on that that's before you tonight, and I want to applaud them for their work. You know, they've handled themselves, conducted themselves in a professional manner, and they're here for the benefit of the Waterbury residents, so I thank you too. I just happen to actually prefer the Waterbury plan because I think it'll be less disruption to the city as a whole, while accomplishing the goal of charter revision and what the people in the city of Waterbury voted for. Now, I know there's some outstanding issues, and you may consider, I believe it's within your capability to not take any plan and come up with your own at this point. It's a little late in the game, but you may so consider that. But I know there's some concern about the East End, Booley Manor, and if there was some kind of initiative to kind of fix that, I say that you can't really fix one district here, because anytime you mess with any one of those districts, the effect is going to cascade around the city. So 1 or 2 districts will be affected, maybe 3 or 4. And if you're going to do that, maybe you would kind of fix some of those outlying areas like Town Platten to Brooklyn, along the 72nd border, Waterville Street, Upper Fulton. But there's a plan. You don't have to go to the drawing board. There's an alternate plan that already addresses that. Okay, it's that Waterbury plan. But in wrapping up, I would just like to say that whatever you decide to do, again, I want to tell you that I believe that you're fully capable, all of you, you're fully capable of handling this. I wish you the best regard in that manner. And I know there's some talk about minority voting here tonight, but if you look at the Hispanic vote in the new 5th district, there's been a Hispanic state representative for about 14 years, last 14 years.
1 minute, Mr. Reverend.
Okay. And as far as the African American vote, in the 2nd district, or the new 2nd district, there has been an African American state representative that has represented that area for over 38 years. So just to keep it all in perspective, thank you very much for this time to speak and address you tonight, and I wish you well. It's out of our hands as individuals, but it's now in your capable hands. I wish you the best. Thank you.
Next speaker from 116 East Farm Street, Cliff Petaway.
Cliff Petaway from 116 East Farm Street. Once again, I'd like to thank everyone for their effort in this process. Mr. President, I believe in January, across the street from my address, there was a Rehoboth Church and a Martin Luther King celebration. I believe that was you that was there. I didn't mean to stick you out, but thank you so much for being there. I'm proud that you're there. And so it's in that spirit that Martin Luther King is our leader and a mentor in the black community, in the African American community. And in 1965, he did, as was mentioned, the March on Selma. That was in reference to the Voters' Rights Act. And so today, in that same spirit, we want to make sure that the voting rights and the strength in the African American community is protected. So the first plan that had, I believe, 35%, is that correct? And that's where we want the maximum strength in our African American community. Thank you.
Next speaker from 96 Down Street, Martin Lee, Vining Spring.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Martin Lee, Vining Spring, 96 Down Street. I'd just like to say that when my wife and I voted for this plan, we didn't look at the diversity of anybody's skin or color or anything. We voted because we knew it was the right thing to do. And I know there's a lot of folks here tonight, they're concerned about not having no representation, but I have a lot of faith and confidence Mr. Morrison's plan, including Larry Butler, who's my state rep, by the way. And I think, you know, the demographer has unquestionable, impeccable, and, you know, things that he's done here tonight and, you know, with this map. And I don't understand why, you know, some people, in my opinion, just voicing my opinion, have to make a race issue out of this. I mean, you know, people can't help the color of their skin. What am I supposed to do? Because I'm a white man, so I got to be put in the back of the bus. I did nothing to nobody, okay? You know, what I have to say this is that my family goes back to this country almost 400 years, and they fought in the Revolutionary War and the Civil War. And one of my ancestors was a prisoner of war in Andersonville and fought for the Union Army. All I can say is, I really wish that we'd all come together for the betterment of the city of Waterbury. And if I look at this plan, the first district is 22,328 voting population. The second is 21,856. And the other one is 22,317. The fourth district is 21,933. And the fifth district is 21,932. And I don't see no color of anybody's skin on this district. And I'm sorry if people don't like what I'm saying, but I tell you people all the time, the last time I looked, there's still American flag on that pole. And in the Constitution, we're all guaranteed in this country life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I really hope, in my opinion, again, that we all come together. And I really wish people would come to more of the meetings. So yesterday, I mean not yesterday, Monday, I was at the Board of Aldermen meeting. And as you guys know, I was the only one here speaking. But I do want to thank Mr. Morrison. I do want to thank all these great folks for being here, and the ladies too. And I do want to thank all the people who was on the various boards and commissions to put this together. And I'm grateful that everybody is all here together and voicing their opinion. But again, I just have to say, I don't want to make this race issue. We do have a very diverse population in the city of Waterbury. We have Muslims, we have Albanians, we have people from all walks of life, race, creed, and color. My nationality is English. I'm proud to be English. My family been here for a long time. My wife is Irish. Her family came here a long time ago too. I have, you know, people got to understand, when you look at people, you just can't say for the pigment of their skin. You have to look at their heart and what they're all about. There's a lot of people, very diversified people in this city of all nationalities. And I know you're Polish, and I know there's a lot of people, Italians and all Lithuanians, all kinds of nationalities. And people, you know, should look at that. And you know, we all got to come together, because that's the bottom line. Because Jimmy knows I like him very much, and James Monroe, he's a very good friend of mine. I know a lot of good folks here in the room, okay? People of color, whatever you want to say. But the bottom line is, I've never been a prejudiced person in my life, nor would I ever raise my children to be prejudiced. A long time ago, I remember we had some issues when we were little, and we lived on North Main Street, by the way, and my parents...
1 minute, Mr. Spring.
Okay, this is real quick, and I want the black folks to hear this. And my dad was broken down. My dad was a World War II veteran. The car was broken down. This is God's truth. And nobody, I believe I told this to Jimmy, nobody helped us except some black lady let all these white folks in her house. And praise the Lord, she let us in and she took care of us. And she let us stay for the night till my father got the car fixed. And this lady, God bless her, God rest her soul, nobody even cared. She was the only one that took care of us and let us in that house. And she gave us food and shelter. And
Next speaker from 37 Cables Avenue, Keith Mahler.
Good evening, Mr. President, members of the board. I'm here representing...
Could you just state your name and address again?
It's Keith Mahler. I reside at 87 Cables Avenue in Waterbury, Connecticut.
Thank you.
I've been a voter here since 1980. I think a few of you may know me. I'm here representing everybody on the south side of Cables Avenue. I think somebody needs to take a look at the districting before this plan is voted on. To me, it doesn't make a difference whether it's the Butler plan or the plan preferred by Mr. Morrison, but the district does not represent the voters and the residents of that area in particular. I can't remember the last time I voted for a state rep, because the state rep for that area, when they split the street, just does not represent the district. We should be in the upper part, which is the bulk of Overlook. The district is different across the street. I understand drawing the line below our houses and everything below that, but I think you need to just take a look at that.
Next speaker from 250 Wood Street, James Monroe.
James Monroe, 250 Wood Street. Board of Aldermen, Waterbury, all the people that came out tonight, it's good to see you. You're voicing your opinion, and that's what Alderman by District is about. I wear two hats. You've already heard from one hat, so now I'll speak to you as James Monroe from 250 Wood Street, Scoville Home President. I want to say to you that this has been a long and hard journey, and people don't want to make it about race. They want good government. The National NAACP has received the plans. They're looking at them. They're going to advise us which way to go. But that's no threat. We're just concerned about good government again. Larry, you did an excellent job. We are proud of you. Most of us want the Larry Butler plan, but we've been told that it's going to be vetoed. We've been told that if it goes forward, you're not going to be able to defend it. Well, this should have been said in the very beginning. Now we feel that we're held hostage and that we have to accept Morrison's plan. Well, I compliment all the ministers, all the church people that were here today, and they're saying neither plan, and I support that. They say send it back and do it right, and it's not that hard to do right. Thank you very much.
Mr. President, that's the last speaker tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Sheriff. With that, we'll close the public hearing. I guess it's all one meeting, it was noticed. We'll close the public hearing portion of the meeting, and we'll go to the special meeting regarding the establishment of voting districts for the election of the Board of Aldermen. Do you want to take a minute before we start, or do you want to go right into it? Right into it? All right, let's go. We'll do if everyone would please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance and a silent prayer. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Alderman Picoci. Here. Alderman Bagnall. Alderman Brunelli.
Oh, Alderman Brunelli is back and forth because he's at the zoning meeting.
Alderman Cicchetti.
Here.
Alderwoman Cummings.
Here.
Alderman DePillo.
Here.
Alderman Giacomi.
Here.
Alderman Hadley.
Here.
Alderman Lopez.
Here.
Alderman Mulcahy. Alderman Napoli.
Here.
Alderman Padula.
Present.
Alderwoman Phelan.
Here.
Alderman Ursini. Alderman Pernaruski.
Here.
12 present, 3 absent.
We have a quorum. With that, the first item under this would be a presentation and remarks from Kramer and Anderson. The second part is from Dr. Morrison. We can sort of run those together, but however you want to start with that. So I'll call first on Attorney Casagrande to start us off.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good evening, members of the Board of Aldermen. I'll try to be very brief. I just have a PowerPoint presentation that the intent is to just walk you through the general aspects of the legal aspects of what you're required to do and consider in adopting this plan. First, I thought it would be a good idea just to go back to the charter amendment that was passed in November. And that, as you'll see on the screen, it indicates that the Board of Aldermen will consist of 15 aldermen and alderwomen, with 3 aldermen from each of 5 districts as approved by the Board of Aldermen. The 3 candidates with the highest votes in each district will be elected. Of those 3 elected by each district, no more than 2 shall be from one political party. And let me just say at the outset, I know there's been some issue. I know Alderman DePillo, you brought up the question about how does that work when you have the question of an unaffiliated person who gets on the ballot as an unaffiliated candidate. My partner, Randall DeBella, issued an opinion to the DRC, which is part of the exhibits before you, that says that in our opinion, that alderman would be seated as an unaffiliated voter regardless of his party enrollment. I know there's been some dispute about that. I don't want to sidetrack the issue for tonight. That's not before you tonight. What we do recommend, in our opinion, is that if a sufficient number of the board believe that is the wrong result, you have, in our opinion, the ability to adopt an ordinance. The general statutes and elections give local legislative bodies a lot of discretion in determining the manner in which their local elected officials are elected. So I would leave that to the board's discretion. The next slide is just again part of what happened in November about voting districts, and it says the city shall be divided into 5 voting districts. They shall contain substantially equal population. I'll get to the reason for that in a second. They shall be established in as compact and contiguous form as practicable, and boundaries must follow geographical divisions and currently existing state of representative districts wherever practical. The city districts must conform to applicable state and federal laws. Next slide, just want to briefly go through the timelines for action. Pursuant to the charter amendments, the Board of Aldermen appointed the District Reapportionment Commission in late November. As you've heard, the DRC held public hearing sessions 3 in January and the last on February 4th, and at a special meeting on February 4th issued its report, adopted a resolution and a report to the Board of Aldermen, which, as you know, recommends that the board consider both what we've been calling the Butler Plan and the Morrison Plan 3. My understanding is the board at your meeting last week received the report and resolution, and under the charter amendment, you have 60 days to either modify or accept the report and adopt a plan and an implementing ordinance within that time period. So that would bring you to approximately April 18th, 2015. At the DRC hearings, and I'm not going to repeat what the speakers
have summarized, I think they did a great job of summarizing what happened before the board or the DRC. We heard, the commission heard the testimony and report of Dr. Morrison. And I just, at the last meeting before the DRC, I thought it was important to just emphasize and invite the commission's attention to Dr. Morrison's CV, which is, for the record, is Exhibit 28, before you, because I think it's very important for the board to look at that CV and realize the outstanding credentials of the expert that the city has retained to advise you as you go forward. He has represented dozens, literally dozens, of municipalities throughout the United States in his 30-some-odd year career. I'm not going to read all the cities that he has represented, but his methodology and his credentials have never been successfully challenged in any court action. Never been successfully challenged in any court action. Sometimes a court will disagree with one expert's opinion versus another expert's opinion, but his methodology has never been questioned in a court of law. Dr. Morrison, as you know, submitted his Plan 1. There was criticism of that because it allegedly placed too much emphasis on protection of incumbents. Dr. Morrison prepared a Plan 2, which tried to address that. Mr. Butler then came forward with his plan, which, as you've heard, his intent was to try to more closely approximate the district boundaries to the state assembly boundaries. Dr. Morrison listened to Mr. Butler's concerns and questions, as well as other members of the public who were questioning, you know, does the original plan protect the geographical integrity of neighborhoods in the city? And he came back with what is now before you as Morrison Plan 3. And Morrison Plan 3 adopts much of what Mr. Butler adopts in his plan, and Dr. Morrison will address that in a second, but it retains what, in his view and my view, are key aspects that are necessary to keep the plan in compliance with the Voting Rights Act and the Constitution. And I'll just touch on that briefly in a second. The DRC then unanimously recommended that the Board of Aldermen consider both plans. So that's procedurally where you are. Legally, and I know it's very difficult to summarize the Voting Rights Act and all the constitutional requirements in a brief time, but let me give it 2 seconds or 2 minutes to try. What are the legal requirements before you? First, you have the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution, which says, in part, no city shall deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. What does that mean? That means, and this is basically United States Supreme Court case law that has come down over the years to create a body of law on equal protection when it comes to voting districts. It means that voting districts must be substantially equal in size. It's the principle of one person, one vote. They don't have to be identical in size, but basically the rule of thumb has evolved that the overall range between the maximum number of voters in one district and the least number of voters in the smallest district has to be within 10%. And that's generally suffices as a rule of thumb. If you're within 10%, you comply with that requirement. And as Dr. Morrison will explain, his plan does meet that. In addition, the courts require that the districts have to be drawn with consideration of what they call traditional districting factors, such as trying to keep districts compact, not, have gargoyle-headed districts that go out. Try to keep them, envision a circle as the most compact of a district. They focus on trying to keep them as compact as possible. Try to keep communities of interest from being separated, and that would include traditional neighborhoods, as you've heard testimony about, and the DRC heard testimony about. Minimization of boundary changes, geographical boundary changes, were practical. And consideration of protecting incumbents from fighting against each other. That is one of the principles that courts say is a legitimate consideration. The DRC heard members of the public said that they did not want incumbency protection to be even a small factor, and Dr. Morrison heard that, and his revised Plan 3 places what I'll say is minimal significance on protecting incumbents. Again, that's all within your discretion in adopting a plan. And I'll note that the Connecticut General Statute says it is not necessary to strictly follow any congressional, senatorial, or assembly district lines in drafting your districts. The next amendment to the Constitution that comes into play is the 15th Amendment, is Section 1, which is the Voter Rights Amendment. And that says the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state. The state includes local subdivisions, political subdivisions, like Waterbury, on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Congress, it took them a while. The 15th Amendment was passed, as you know, in the 1800s. But in 1965, as part of Lyndon Johnson's civil rights initiatives, Congress passed the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which has been amended a few times. But it basically, Section 2 of that act, which is the section that applies to Waterbury, basically says that voting standards, practices, and procedures which deny or limit the right to vote based on race, color, or language minority are prohibited. How does one prove a violation of that prohibition? If the evidence shows that protected minorities, which obviously would include African Americans and Hispanics, have less opportunity than other groups to participate in the political process with regard to the nomination and election of the representatives of their choice. And violation is shown, and again, this is based on the evolution of United States Supreme Court case law over the years, is shown if based on the totality of the circumstances, the minority who claims that its rights have been diluted is able to prove that the effect of a particular practice has diluted its voting strength. Minority voting dilution is a form of a violation of the Voting Rights Act. And as one of the last speakers summarized, there's several ways that a plaintiff could potentially show voter dilution. First is cracking, which is basically the division of a racial or language minority among districts in a manner which prevents the minority from being able to elect the candidate of their choice. In other words, just dispersing minority populations throughout districts so as to dissipate their rights to participate in the process. It also occurs when there's packing, which is basically where a legislature decides to pack a voting district with as many minority members as possible so that the remaining districts are not populated by a sufficient number of the minorities. And that's another practice that is frowned upon. Lastly, and I'll turn it over very quickly to Dr. Morrison, Dr. Morrison's draft Plan 3, in his professional judgment, is the plan which best protects the city from a potential challenge under the Voting Rights Act. It takes minority populations into account. As you've heard, it creates two, they're not majority districts, but they're two coalition districts. I think it's District 1 and 2, I believe, in which there's a sufficient number of African Americans and blacks in each of those districts to basically constitute 60% or more of the voting population in that district. So it does take into account and try to protect against dilution of the voting strength of those two minorities based on those two districts. It takes race into account, but race does not predominate in Dr. Morrison's plan. And that's critical, because if you draw a plan such that race is the predominant or the overriding factor in how you establish your districts, that is probably the worst possible situation that you want to find yourself in, because that triggers strict scrutiny analysis under the Constitution. In other words, you have to demonstrate that there's a compelling governmental interest for having race predominate in the considerations, and that it's not outweighed by any, it's not narrowly drafted to take that into account. Now, Dr. Morrison's plan takes race into account through the districts that I've just mentioned, but it complies with the substantially equal requirement, the 10% distribution, and it takes traditional districting principles into account. I mean, his Plan 3 is a change from his first plan, and that change in large part is due to what the public and Mr. Butler indicated about trying to protect the integrity of neighborhoods. That's a traditional districting principle. So, again, he took race into account, but he also took traditional districting principles into account. And as I said, when you look at this, and the problem is it's not a science, it's an art, it's a balancing test, and it's a judgment that you have to make in the end. But in his professional opinion, this is the plan that best insulates the city from potential litigation. Does it ensure that the city will not be sued? No, no one can guarantee that. Anybody can sue for any reason. But the idea is to come up with a plan drafted by one of the nation's foremost demographic experts that, in his view, best protects the city. So with that, with Mr. President, your permission, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Morrison.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening. I'd like to invite you to ask questions about any aspects of this after I make a very brief presentation about what I have tried to accomplish. And I want to precede what I'm going to say by emphasizing that what's involved here is a balancing act. There is a balancing act between the requirements of the Voting Rights Act, where one has to respect where concentrations of one or another minority are within the community and not dilute their vote when forming districts. But there are a number of other considerations that come into play, including things like incumbency, including things like neighborhoods, and really emphasizing a very generic term which is known as communities of interest. A community of interest can be anything that your local citizens define as a community of interest. And what I heard Citizens and Reapportionment Commission members urge me to focus on after my first presentation as the collective objectives, the core principles unifying your community, are neighborhoods. And they conveyed to me very strongly, at least I heard very strongly, the message that this is a community organized around established neighborhoods. It is not a community that is separated along racial or ethnic lines. Now, admittedly, in what I've done, several neighborhoods have to be joined differently than the residents of those neighborhoods would desire in an ideal world. But on balance, my plan number 3 is a plan where most citizens will benefit from more effective political representation, and most important, that representation will spring from all voters broadly empowered across the city. I'd like to be clear as to what distinguishes the two plans before you, Mr. Butler's plan and my plan number 3. The plan number 3 that I devised is one that has evolved out of several efforts to come closer to balancing what I heard everybody saying who spoke before the Reapportionment Commission. The plan incorporates what I regarded as the best features of Representative Butler's original plan, but it also goes beyond that to incorporate the suggestions from the public, and many of those suggestions had to do with neighborhoods. And the message that I got again and again was to avoid splitting neighborhoods wherever possible and to the extent possible. And so that became one of my primary criteria, to minimize the number of neighborhoods that were split. There were further technical refinements that I used to, as I said, narrow the city's potential exposure to future litigation. And what was involved there was to try to adjust things after everything else was done so that I was able to improve the demographic parameters ever so slightly, but improve them nonetheless. Providing a district in which Hispanics would be 46.2% of the eligible voters in District 5, compared with 45.8% in Mr. Butler's plan. A 0.4 of a percentage point difference, but nonetheless proof that I tried to increase that percentage, and admittedly cannot get it any higher than that without essentially destroying the neighborhood fabric of the city. I can create a majority Hispanic district if you want to ignore everything else. Forget about any of the neighborhoods. Let me carve up the territory block by block. That's what you saw. That's what the Reapportionment Commission saw in the first map. I characterize that as the man from Mars map. I come in, I know nothing about the city. I say, here's the perfect plan. It insulates you as in a theoretical, analytic, abstract sense completely, because I've created a majority Hispanic district and I have maximized the concentration of African Americans in the city. And I think the concentration of African Americans was another percentage point or two. I can't remember, maybe 5 percentage points. Everybody looked at that and they said, I don't understand the logic of this plan. It makes no sense to me. I said, tell me why. Because it destroys the neighborhood fabric of this city. That's when I redirected my effort and I said, this is a city that values its neighbors, its neighborhoods, its existing historic neighborhoods. So I started out with that, and then I said, okay, how can I clean up the boundaries so that we avoid splitting neighborhoods and yet still bring the plan into compliance with the Voting Rights Act by saying I respected where the concentrations of the two minorities are. I looked into the history of past elections in a very cursory fashion, because you remember that statement about weighing balancing the totality of circumstances. The totality of circumstances, among other things, includes the question of whether one or another minority has been elected in the past. And I was told that I saw evidence that there have been African Americans elected in the past and that there have been Hispanics elected in the past. And I was also told by several people that, yes, there is, on occasion, crossover voting and coalitional voting. Doesn't happen all the time. It may not happen usually, but it does happen. So I factored all those into my final plan number 3. And this plan features a district in which Hispanics are 46.2% of the eligible voters. It would be hard to ignore 46.2 of the eligible voters if you were running for office in that district. District 2 has a 30.5% African American share and also a 30.5% Hispanic share. So together you have 3/5 of eligible voters are black or Hispanic, and that gives a considerable amount of power to the two groups, or to either one if they choose to form some crossover voting or coalition with non-Hispanic white voters. So there are a lot of possibilities there. As I said, a few neighborhoods would not be whole. Booley Manor is one of them, but I want you to understand that the reason that I was not able to keep Booley Manor whole, despite looking at it from a variety of perspectives and certainly trying to keep it whole, is that in Booley Manor, according to the census data, Latinos constitute nearly 1/3 of all the eligible voters. And that is a significant share. And if I were to remove Booley Manor from the Hispanic district that I've created, that would certainly constitute a blatant change in the plan, such as a plaintiff could look at it and say, there's no question that what you did here was you diluted Hispanic voting strength in order to meet the needs of the neighbors in that one area. And so I refrain from doing that. I would not advise you to move in that direction because it opens up the prospect of a plaintiff filing a lawsuit. Let me remind you that the city retained my firm to narrow your exposure to litigation while responding to the citizens' desires to reinforce traditional neighborhood communities of interest. And my intent here has been to shield the city from any possible claim that you diluted Latinos' voting strength or that you diluted African Americans' voting strength, given the balancing of other important redistricting criteria that I took into account. And I will say that among those criteria, incumbency played no role whatsoever in the final plan. I believe that my plan number 3 reduces the prospect of a lawsuit, and as I have said publicly, it is the one plan that I would feel most comfortable defending in court were I called as an expert to testify on your behalf. So that is what I did, and I would urge you to recommend to adopt plan number 3 if those are the objectives that you still have in mind. Thank you.
Can I just, before you go, can I just ask you a couple questions? And then we'll see if others want to do that. One of the things, as I understand it, as the maps were evolving, and I appreciate what got us to where we are today, was that there was a sense within the minority communities and the leaders of those communities that the neighborhoods were paramount to everything else. And I don't know, I did not attend all of the meetings or most of the meetings, so I don't know who spoke and who didn't speak. But we've heard tonight from a number of leaders within the African American community, a number of ministers who came, who frankly were the same folks who came at the beginning of this process and urged us to do alderman by district, and I think weighed heavily in my decision this year to vote to put that out there because of the concerns within their community. And I just wonder if, having heard from them this evening and their concerns about the dilution of voting, if that would affect anything that you've done or the thought process that you went through with the results, the ability to defend this plan, were we to have a lawsuit, even if we were to choose your plan.
I can only tell you that the range, the mathematically possible range of what I could do if I ignored everything else would be to change the African American share of eligible voters in a hypothetical district from its present level, which is 30.5%, to, if memory serves me correctly, somewhere around 36%. Now, 36% sounds like a meaningful difference to an African American constituency. But I would point out that under the Voting Rights Act, the first precondition for challenging a plan is to demonstrate that the minority that is challenging it could hypothetically form a district in which that minority would be a majority of eligible voters. That is to say, would be 50% of eligible voters. That is a mathematical impossibility in this city for African Americans. It is not a mathematical impossibility for Hispanics, although it is barely mathematically possible. And I would say the only conceivable plaintiff that could confront this plan now, based on the precondition that you have to demonstrate that it is possible to form a majority Hispanic or a majority black district, the only group that would have standing, and Mr. Casagrande can correct me on this if I'm wrong, would be Hispanics. There seems to be a misunderstanding in the community that, and I'm just speaking now based on what I heard tonight, because this is the first time I've ever heard anybody refer to an us versus them situation. And I'm the one who said at the last meeting, I had heard everybody talk about neighborhoods, but I had not heard anybody utter the word them. in this room until tonight. And I want to be clear that the voices that I have heard have been, until tonight, very, very strongly emphasizing neighborhoods. Either as a general principle, neighborhoods matter to us in this city, or very often, my neighborhood, be sure to pay attention to my neighborhood. People had their own narrow interest in their community of interest. It's their neighborhood. But it doesn't matter if they're looking at it narrowly or community-wide. Neighborhood is the message that I got. And I would say that the message that I got from the number of people that I heard come to the microphone over, I don't know, it was 3 or 4 meetings, certainly greatly outnumbered the voices that I heard tonight who were saying it's got to be as black a district as you can form or we're not happy. And in fact, the voices tonight have rejected both the plans. They've rejected not only my plan, they were saying that they could not live with either my plan or Mr. Butler's plan because they're saying that Mr. Butler's plan, in their view, also is diluting the voting strength of blacks. I would prefer to look at this in terms of the record of blacks who have been elected in this city and say it's clear that the territory involved here is territory inhabited by voters who do elect minorities. That's been a proven fact. And I just don't buy the argument that every other criterion should be sacrificed for the exclusive purpose of maximizing one group's representation in a district when that is not mandated by the Voting Rights Act. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I think it does. And there's just the last piece, and it's part of what you've talked about, but just it struck me before, to the extent that you're trying to maximize minority participation and you end up with these districts that are now coalition districts where you have to have, presuming that the Hispanic community and the African American community may have different interests at some point, is there some concern, should there be any concern that by having a coalition district to address minority participation that you're really diluting the voting strength, particularly in this case of African Americans?
No, because there is no way to really boost the African American share without essentially destroying the neighborhoods. And so what I've done in this context is created what I would regard as the district that is African American as one can make it, 30.5%, just as there is the Hispanic district, 46.2%, not 50%, 46.2%. But there is the added advantage that if one looked at it in terms of a minority district, that is to say 2 minorities who feel that their voting strength is being abridged by, let's say, block voting by non-Hispanic whites, that District 2 is a district where block voting can't occur because there is no majority block vote among non-Hispanic whites. So that addresses another part of the problem that's over here. I don't know if it exists in fact, but one could make the case, well, it seemed it's a nice setup to have a district where you can say any 2 groups out of 3 can easily determine who gets elected here, and it creates what I see as hopeful opportunities going forward. Any candidate running for office in District 2 can say, to whom do I want to appeal? Do I want to appeal on racial ethnic grounds? Do I want to appeal on the basis of delivering services in this district to 1 or possibly 2 groups who feel that they have not been getting the services that they deserve? There are a lot of possibilities that evolve here, and a coalition district, I think, is a forward-looking one in a city that values neighborhoods and that does not regard itself as having been severely divided along racial ethnic lines, especially white versus minority, if you adopt that perspective.
Thank you. Any other questions? Alderman DePillo?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Morrison. I did attend all of the meetings of the redistricting committee. And the question I have for you is currently the Butler plan, or as he now refers to as the Waterbury plan. Those districts are the districts that would have primarily existed prior to the breakup of the 71st district with Middlebury. Is that pretty accurate as to what that plan represents?
I'm not really fully conversant with this Mr. Butler's plan, but my understanding is that it pays somewhat more heed to the boundaries of the House districts and possibly the former House districts. And in that sense, what Mr. Butler was endeavoring to do was to maintain some connection with those communities of interest, because they can be regarded legitimately as communities of interest. And in fact, there is a legal, admonition to try to follow the boundaries insofar as you can. It doesn't turn out that, from my standpoint, it's very easy to follow those boundaries without getting into trouble in some other way. But that's what his plan does, and you should see it in that light, that it does respect those communities of interest. And I would say that the only flaw that I see, the obvious flaw that I see is not, I see a lot of other aspects of it, but a clear flaw from the standpoint of, does it insulate you against litigation, is that it has the Hispanic share as 45.8%, whereas mine is 46.2%, so I don't like that. And his share for blacks in District 2 is 30%, mine is 30.5%. So, I have to go with mine because the numbers are slightly better. And having gone public with it, I'd have to say that I recommended my plan, and if they adopt Butler's plan, it sure looks almost the same in terms of the numbers, but that's not the way a plaintiff is going to look at it. A plaintiff is going to look at it as, I see the chink in the armor, I see I can insert a narrow knife in that armor, and I can twist it. And they may never prevail in a lawsuit, but you'll end up with the attorney's fees that you have to pay. That's the reality.
All right, and I know that I know the motivation, or at least I think I know the motivation of Representative Butler, and that was to try and keep as much of the neighborhoods that historically have been Waterbury intact. I've lived in Bunker Hill for 41 years, and I've always voted in the 73rd District. And, in all of the changes there have been because of census, in 41 years I've still been in the 73rd District. I know that that's also the case in much of the 74th. It seems the district that took the biggest hit in the last redistricting of the city was Town Plot, where because of the spinoff into Middlebury. And the reason I bring that up is in what is now the Butler plan, the 2nd District, which is primarily the 72nd District. Leaving that intact the way Representative Butler has it would give the black vote 30%, the Hispanic 28.4%. And in your plan, the 2nd District actually would increase the black vote to 30.5% and 30.5% for the Hispanic. So, so the current 72nd or 2nd District, as proposed by Representative Butler, actually has a smaller minority vote than the 2nd District that you're proposing.
Correct. That's an important point to understand. It's not a big difference, but it's a difference that makes a difference if you're looking at it the way I look at it, which is I am demonstrating my effort to do everything I can to increase the minority share wherever I can in accordance with the Voting Rights Act, along with all the other things I have to do. And I just want to also clarify that we're talking about neighborhoods of two types. We're talking about, or I should say, communities of interest. Communities of interest in terms of the 71st district, the various House districts. And also, I'm referring to communities of interest in terms of the defined small neighborhoods within the city, the ones that are officially shown by the city as neighborhoods with, as part of recognized neighborhoods. And I want to be clear that everybody understands, I think there's a misunderstanding here, that my plan divides fewer of those smaller scale neighborhoods than Mr. Butler's plan does. You can verify that by simply comparing the two maps outside. One of the things I did in trying to refine my plan and to keep the best of Mr. Butler's aspect of the plan was to say the one thing that I can improve on with Mr. Butler's plan when I make my plan number 3 is I can get rid of the few places where he has inadvertently split local neighborhoods. And he was not looking at it from that perspective. I mean, I'm sure he could have, but that wasn't part of his picture. His picture was to look at it from the standpoint of the larger House district communities of interest. And I said, while we're at it, I'm cranking up the minority concentration very slightly, and I can see ways of changing a few boundaries here and there so that I think I ended up splitting one more neighborhood than I had, but avoiding splitting 5 others that he had split. So the net improvement was like +4 for me. And I said, this is a good plan because now I've avoided splitting neighborhoods, and I've got minorities cranked up as much as I can, and I've got a coalition district that provides opportunities for coalitional voting, which I understand occurs here. So I wouldn't have any trouble defending that in court and say the spirit of the Voting Rights Act is to do what you can in terms of keeping minority concentration intact, but don't make it the predominant factor. Race is not the sole factor here. Listen to what people said. I explicitly asked when we started this process to have all of these sessions recorded so that there is a record in the event of a future plaintiff as to just who asked for what. And I will say, listen to all the sessions and tell me which word did you hear most frequently. That word was neighborhood. So it's a matter of record. I'm comfortable testifying as an expert in court on my Plan 3. And I think that I know what I tried to do, and I can be perfectly frank, I did the best I could.
Okay, because, I've been a proponent of aldermen by district for more than 2 decades, and was on the Charter Revision Commission that actually produced the non-binding referendum on aldermen by district. I always thought it was a better form of government for the city of Waterbury, and I certainly supported the 3x5 plan, which is what your proposals and Representative Butler's proposals are both based on. And in all the years that I've been involved, the one thing that I heard was most important to the citizens was that it represent their districts that they perceive as their districts. When you're living somewhere in the city, when people ask you where you live, I don't tell them I live on Steuben Street, I tell them I live in Bunker Hill. And if somebody asks you where you live in Tom Plot. You don't live on Wakinda Avenue. And I know that's the same throughout the city. People feel very strongly about where they live and where they vote and where they have their communities. And I don't think it's any less predominant in the 72nd District or the 2nd District than it is in Tom Plot or Bunker Hill. And I agree that I think the one thing that was most important to the public was the fact that they could look at a map that was put together either such by yourself, and certainly Representative Butler deserves a lot of kudos for the hard work that he put in providing the map that he did. Because it does, for the most part, keep neighborhoods together. And I think that's paramount to the people here in the city. What they really were very leery of is that an administration and the credit here has to go to the current administration, that an administration would try and divide the city up and divide the neighborhoods. And this is what their largest concern was about alderman by district, and this is to some degree why it took more than 20 years to get actually an alderman by district proposal passed. So I heard the people at the public at the first meeting of the district committee. They did not want to see the city broken up. They did not want to see the districts destroyed. And that's why I spoke so strongly about the fact that there are no incumbents, including myself, because the people of Waterbury decided that there was going to be a change in the way government operated in Waterbury. And when they chose alderman by district, they wiped the slate clean. There's no such thing as an incumbent because there is no longer an at-large Board of Aldermen system in the city of Waterbury. It is only alderman by district. So, I know a number of people have spoken very strongly on behalf of the Butler Plan, holding the neighborhoods a little tighter together, especially those in Mbuli Manor, who, as you know, came to the podium a number of times. But again, I think myself as an alderman, although I'd like to see something done for the people of Mbuli Manor, if it could be done, you say at this point you've looked at it several ways and you're not found a way. Just as I understand what Mr. Mahler wanting to do something with Cables Avenue, and I don't know whether or not that would skew the numbers enough that that's not possible either. We're on here as aldermen, we're not demographers. So anything that we're going to come up with, somebody else is going to have to look at and say, yeah, it's okay to move that line, or we may be asked to approve something without moving any of the lines. So I just wanted to thank you for your efforts. I know we didn't always agree. I certainly didn't agree with some of the legal decision that came down regarding how people may be seated on the Board of Aldermen, but that's something to be resolved at a later date. But anyways, whether this alderman decides that Larry Butler's map better represents the districts or your map, I understand that we have to avoid litigation if it's possible. And I thank you for making the best attempt to keep Waterbury's neighborhoods intact.
Well, I appreciate that sincerely.
I have one question I meant to ask Attorney Casagrande before. I think it would be you. In the event that we did choose a plan that brought a lawsuit, right? We end up with a lawsuit. What is the immediate effect of that? I know the long-term effect will litigate it out and come up with a decision one way or the other, but what would that do to our trying to get something, this process or this district plan on the ballot? I guess my question is, would it stop that process, or would it allow the process to go forward and then we would undo it at some future date?
It could stop it. If you read the federal, especially the U.S. District Court opinions, which really that's where the fight is on these lawsuits, one of the first things that plaintiffs try to do is stop the election that is going to go forward based on the plan. Sometimes courts will agree with that. Sometimes courts, at least based on my reading of the case law, will say, no, go forward with this election because we don't want to disenfranchise people, but we'll litigate the case going forward. So the answer is, there's no bright line rule, but it's possible. Aggressive plaintiffs could seek an injunction to try to stop the election.
Okay, thank you. Alderman Phelan, then Alderman Napoli.
Thank you. Dr. Morrison, I think your first name should be changed perhaps to Solomon, trying to appease so many people. I do have to make a couple of statements that I did not support alderman by district. I was very vocal in that, but nevertheless, the people have spoken, and I fully support that. And I will do whatever I can to make sure that it's implemented properly and correctly. That being said, I'm also an East Ender. And as all the other parts of the city, we're very proud of where we live, and that's how we identify ourselves. And throughout my lifetime, and I'm sure people had before me, Bully Manor was always the East End, along with St. Peter's, St. Peter and Paul Church and School. Under the plan that's now before us, they are in the downtown or the 75th, or the new 5th district, whatever it is, the 5th district, yes. I'll call it the downtown just to make it easy. I know you said that you looked at different ways to change Bully Manor. I have to ask it anyway. Is it possible, is it the Hispanic component that's the problem for that?
I wouldn't characterize it as a problem. I would simply say that were I to remove the Hispanic-rich territory that corresponds to Bully Manor and pull it out of that district, then I would be, any plaintiff could construe that as a change that had the effect of reducing Hispanics' concentration, that is to say, diluting Hispanics' vote. And it wouldn't have to be that anybody intended to do that. It would simply be that the effect was to say that 46.2% Hispanic, when you took Bully Manor out, drops it down to maybe, let's say, 44%. That's just what a plaintiff is looking for.
Would it be possible to have any idea of the numbers? If we were to take a bird's view, draw a line from Manor Avenue down to Elliott Avenue where it intersects with East Main Street. Anything east of that becomes 74th. And then, of course, take the changes that have been needed, look at the 71st and the area that is now north of Piedmont that you have in the 71st, make that the downtown.
I can't give you an answer off the top of my head there, but what I can say is that if you were a prospective plaintiff looking at the map and looking at all the different whole neighborhoods, and then suddenly you saw there a neighborhood that had been exquisitely manicured, let's say the way you're talking about it. In other words, it was divided up in a particular way, that would immediately draw attention to that area, and it might or might not be a problem, but it would, in my opinion, create a sort of a red flag. And one could say that a number of neighborhoods could be looked at that way. Can you explore an infinite number of possibilities of taking each neighborhood and maybe just take a little bit out of it here or a little bit out of it there? And my mission was to keep neighborhoods whole, and Bully Manor, it may be that it hasn't been traditionally Hispanic, but I can tell you that what the data show today is that there is a significant concentration of Hispanics, and from the map that I was looking at, it didn't look like it was all in one corner of that neighborhood. It looked like it was pretty much, across the area. So I'm hesitant to do what would look like an extreme gerrymander in one part of the map when everything else has clean boundaries. That would be, in a sense, violating the compactness criterion that I'm supposed to respect.
But I mean, it would be the same. It's the same geographic area. You're just taking it from the north, so to speak, northeast, to the southwest of that same district.
Like I say, I'm not familiar with the various specifics.
They're combined. They're right next. One's on top, one's on the bottom of the proposed district. And I'm not a demographer. I don't claim anything to be there. Thank God I'm not. But I'm just going to ask if we could look at that, because I think there might be a pretty good representation of Hispanic families in that area that I just mentioned, and I would be much happier if I knew, yes, it could be, or you're way off the boat.
Well, I looked at it. I gave it enough attention to say that I didn't see any obvious way of making it work without disrupting things elsewhere. Everything is very interconnected, because if I start to mess with one neighborhood, then I have to say, well, where would I put that other piece, and where would I get other territory from some other neighborhood that I now have to split. So it creates kind of a cascading effect. And I'm not saying that, with an infinite amount of effort, one couldn't make some changes in some neighborhoods, but looking at it, the way I didn't see any clear-cut way of addressing that. And I know that there has been ongoing concern from that neighborhood. And I looked at Booley Manor in particular, and I tried some exploratory options to see if I could draw the boundary, without respect to what people were saying they wanted to happen. I just was trying to figure out if there's some way I could isolate the Hispanic concentration and keep it with the downtown, and then say the rest could go somewhere else. And I didn't see any obvious way of doing that. So my answer to you is based on the analysis that I've done and really the focus on that question thus far. I haven't been able to come up with any easy way to do that, although I certainly can't rule out that it's a mathematical possibility. If you spend enough time on it, you might be able to do it block by block. And one of the problems is that the resolution of the data really sometimes doesn't tell us with much precision exactly where Hispanics are at a particular census block level. We have to start to infer where eligible Hispanic voters are, which would be Hispanic adults who are citizens. And the citizenship becomes a critical factor because you can't count adult Hispanics if they're not citizens because they're not eligible to vote. So you start to get into all sorts of problems in terms of being vulnerable to attack by a plaintiff who would say, you don't really know where the Hispanics are there, you were just guessing, weren't you? And I don't want to be in that position. So it creates kind of an endless chain of uncertainties and problems, and I can tell you that we looked at it every which way, and there wasn't any obvious solution to that problem.
Could you just, define for me what you said, what you mean when we looked at it every which way?
I-5, where it belongs in terms of the demography, in terms of keeping Hispanics at a high enough share of eligible voters, and then somehow have the rest of the area be in some other district. And there were several suggestions about a simple interchange of, I remember, taking something from the south and connecting that and moving Booley Manor out, and I did that, and it dropped the Hispanic share by about 3 or 4 percentage points. And so I said that isn't anything that you want to go near.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Alderman Napoli.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dr. Morrison, thank you very much for being here. Thank you for your efforts and your expertise with this process. In preparing your plan, did you look at the impact of residents voting in different locations for state and local elections and the potential confusion that could perhaps cause?
That issue did come up at, I think, at the second or third meeting where there was a question about voters voting in one polling place as members for an alderman election, but having to vote in another physical place for a House district election or something like that. And we conferred with the registrars, and the answer is they deal with that by simply having ballots that differ so that you go to the same place. And if you are, voting, if you're eligible to vote for this alderman district, but for that House district, you get this ballot. If it's a slightly different one, you get a different ballot, but you still go to the same place. And they also said that they were going to have to basically do an exhaustive review of where all the polling places are under the new system, and that there's nothing that I could do to minimize the work that they're going to have to do. And they said, don't bother us with it until you've adopted a plan, and then we'll make the election work okay by printing up the right ballots for the right people.
Okay. What are the city's future legal obligation to monitor and modify the aldermanic districts? And will the districts we approve need to be periodically adjusted to comply with the Voting Rights Act? And if so, when would the city of Waterbury be required to make those changes?
I can give you the exact answer on that. When the 2020 decennial census is released, you will want to have someone such as myself come in and simply say, well, what are the demographic parameters now based on the latest census? And this is all governed by the last official census count. So that will be somewhere around probably 2021, maybe late 2020. They'll have some preliminary numbers out, and one could look at your districts and say, well, do they still comply with the basic requirement that they are more or less equal in population, without exceeding that 10% range. And then I think you'll want to examine them at a later point when the citizenship data become available, and that will probably won't be until 2022, and say, we just want to do a reality check here. Are we still okay? And you might want to look at it in terms of, is there any obvious way that we could strengthen Hispanics or African Americans, assuming that there's been some substantial change? Or you might look at it and say, parameters look fine, there's nothing wrong with what we have, everything is more or less in balance. Or if it's slightly out of balance, you may want to say, one neighborhood needs to be shifted from one place to another, but I don't foresee, unless there's something about the city that I don't know. This is not like a rapidly growing Florida city where you come back 10 years later and there are 25% more people. My sense is you probably will be looking at a plan that will, 6 years from now, is going to look about where it should be, and maybe there'll be some fine-tuning here and there, but you're not going to have to go through this process again.
Okay. And then my last question is, on your map, are there any streets where, for example, perhaps on one side of the street they vote in one district, and then on the opposite side of the street they vote in a different district? Does that exist?
It shouldn't exist. I'm just trying to think of how that would work if we have a street that is dividing two districts. I guess that's an interesting question. I think it could be either way, according to how your registrars want the polling places to be
or perhaps
set up.
Is that a practice that's kind of you can't stop it or
well, actually,
the
way the Census Bureau counts people, in other words, the way I've accounted for the population, which is to say, my demographic parameters. If you have a street, the people on one side of the street are counted in. If you have a street dividing an alderman district, the people on one side are going to vote in that are going to be counted in that district. The people on the other side are going to be counted in that district. I imagine that the registrars probably have some discretion about saying we'd be easier if you just took everybody up and down the street and said they're going to vote in one or the other. It's not going to be a lot of people either way. And you're certainly not going to be throwing things way out of balance doing it that way. But I would be happy to work with the registrars on that if they have a question.
Thank you very much. And once again, thank you very much for your efforts.
Further questions, Alderman Pocochi?
Thank you, Mr. Morrison. Quick question, and I talked to you a little bit about it outside. We had approximately 30 people here talking tonight, and of the 30 people, I'm going to say 25 of them were against both Mr. Butler's plan and your plan. But 5 of them were in favor of plan number 1 that you came out with. One of them said that he was representing the black community by saying that he wanted plan number 1. Explain to me the reason why we can't have plan number 1.
There's no reason at all why you can't have plan number 1, other than if you listen to all the people who spoke in the first 4 meetings, I think you'll see that none of them liked it. They were unanimously opposed to dividing up, to completely demolishing the neighborhood fabric of this city. And I heard the same message from people who were white, people who were black, and people who were Latino who spoke at this microphone in the first meeting. Virtually everyone of all backgrounds said, this plan, I don't see any logic to it. It divides our neighborhoods up. I listened, I heard the message, and I said, that's not the way to go. I mean, you have to make the judgment.
No, I was just wondering because, I mean, the people are against both plans. Some people are in favor of plan number one. I just don't know where we're going from here.
I can tell you that the voices that I heard tonight were markedly different from anything I've heard at any of the other meetings. And I'll leave it to you to interpret what might account for that. It may be that I should have heard from the people who spoke here tonight at the first meeting. I didn't hear any voices. I didn't hear any voices that were opposed to both the plans as these ideas evolved. I did hear people saying that they favored Mr. Butler's plan, and I was trying to understand what their criteria were, given the fact that my plan has a higher proportion of both blacks and Hispanics in each of the districts. I think there was some confusion about the, if you look at the demographic parameters, this is getting into the weeds a bit, but my plan has, or I should say Mr. Butler's plan has a total deviation from ideal. That is to say that, you should be within 10%. Well, he's saying, well, I'm not only within 10%, I'm within 2%, which is admirable. My plan is within 9.86%. But the only thing that matters is keep it below 10% and think of that 10% as wiggle room that allows me to honor and respect some of the other things that I try to do. Just having it at 2% or 0% has no meaning in terms of the attractiveness of the plan, other than you've made no use of the wiggle room you had. Mr. Butler could easily have said, well, I'll instead of having 2%, I'll go up to 6% and maybe even out some of the neighborhoods or do something else that could be done. That's what I did with my Plan 3. I used the wiggle room to maximum effect. And I think there was some confusion on the part of several people on the commission who thought they just felt uncomfortable with a deviation that was close to the 10% threshold. And to me, if there's a reason to get close to that 10% threshold for a good purpose, you're crazy not to make use of it.
Further questions? Alderman DePillo.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Morrison. Board President Pranaruski asked Attorney Casagrande about a potential lawsuit. You being the demographer, let's say that the Board of Aldermen were to decide on your plan. I'm not saying that that's what they're going to decide on. There's going to be a lot of discussion about Bully Manor and Cables Avenue and I guess other parts of the city. The question I have for you is, if the Board of Aldermen were to go with a plan that you were to say you are extremely comfortable in defending in court, and a lawsuit were brought, would you, let's just talk about your Plan 3. Okay, the Board of Aldermen were to go with your Plan 3, and this matter was brought to court by any number of parties. At that point, are you, not knowing the procedures, at that point, would you have the ability, or as part of the action brought, would you have a say as to whether or not the plan that you brought forward meets all the requirements, and have that before a judge, which would impact whether or not some kind of order could be given to hold up this Alderman by district vote?
I would, if there were a challenge to this plan, I would sit down and in about 4 hours write an expert report that I think would recount every way in which this plan balanced traditional redistricting criteria and accorded with not only the letter of the law, but with the spirit of the law under the Voting Rights Act. And I would then cite as exhibits the recordings of all the people who spoke at the mic during all the meetings and informed me about the importance of neighborhoods. And I would also make note of the fact that I had originally started out with the notion of trying to maximize each group in one district of its own, and discovered that that was not something that anybody said anything favorable about at the first meeting. And so I therefore reflected on the importance of communities of interest, which are one of the traditional redistricting criteria. And I would also cite my public statement that I was ignoring incumbency for the time being, and I never did pay any attention to it after I heard you explain that there really were no incumbents anymore. And then I would recount I would show the succession of plans that I prepared and how they converged on what I regarded as a correct balancing of traditional redistricting criteria, placing emphasis as much as I could on concentrating the two groups in the population, taking account of the, insofar as I did, of the history of past elections and the success that African American candidates and Hispanic candidates had had, the fact that there had been candidates of each group elected, and the fact that I had not seen any evidence of racially polarized voting, or evidence that I had not seen any evidence of white bloc voting regularly defeating one or another minority candidate running for office. I discerned no pattern of white bloc voting depriving minorities of elective office, and in fact I observed minorities getting elected to office. So all of these factors would be, I could put that into a report in a half a day, and I'd present it to a judge, and I would think Mr. Casagrande would say, you want to make a motion to, what's the term you use? Summary judgment, which is tell them to go away. They don't have a leg to stand on. That's the way I feel about this, but I'm not going to give you the legal niceties or whether I'm correct, but that's how strongly I feel about the position that I'm in to defend this plan. I'm happy to defend it, and it wouldn't require much work now that I've got all the numbers put together.
Thank you so very much.
Any further questions? Alderman Orsini?
Thank you, Doctor. Taking litigation off the table, taking you as an expert witness off the table, and taking the fact that you were able to meld the neighborhoods the way you wanted to, and I think tonight was an excellent summary of all the meetings we've had and all the discussions. And you know, I had leanings towards the Butler plan, but is there anything that you saw or that you felt during this whole process that supports your position outside of the technical facets of it that you may have seen or developed as you went along?
Yes, I think I can honestly say that I've not encountered a city the size of Waterbury, you know, just let's say medium-sized city, established city, with an established population of blacks and Hispanics, and also whites, non-Hispanic whites, in which there was as much sort of common concern about the things that unified the city, as opposed to simply saying, this is a city where, you know, we blacks are one group, we Hispanics are another group, and then there's the white people, they're another group, and there are divisions in the community along those lines. They've always been there. We all recognize that we're different. There's us and them. And I'll tell you that you have an uncommon situation here, and I, speaking personally, would hate to see it devolve toward the pattern that characterizes so many American cities that lack what you have in that sense. Not to say that there are not lines that people recognize, but I think the lines that the separative forces are really muted relative to the things that unify the city and certainly have the potential to maintain that unity. And one of the things that I realized about my plan only after we put it together, I said, well, gee, I see District 2, you've got 30.5% Hispanic, 30.5% black. That's a nice foundation for going forward. That creates opportunities beyond the narrow concept of each group has its own district. It creates opportunities to forge alliances across districts. And what you have now are both the spirit and the letter of the law in terms of the Voting Rights Act saying, don't dilute the vote of either group. But you also have the spirit honored by a district where you say, if you've seen some coalitional voting, even if it's uncommon, you've given it a chance to flourish in the future. I don't know if that will happen or not, but you can run your elections for a few rounds between now and the next census and see how it works. And then maybe you'll say, well, gee, coalitions, we didn't see any at all. Maybe we should turn the dial and after the 2020 census a little more toward concentrating Hispanics and concentrating blacks at the expense of a few neighborhoods. Or you may find that coalitional voting emerged, in which case you'd say, that's great, let's stay on that path. But the factors, the forces that can unify your community are present, and they should not be, I'd hate to have you adopt a plan that had any, in any sense, was extinguishing those tendencies.
It's very nice to hear. One other thing, regardless of what plan we elect to advance, does the collective Waterburyan spirit have any weight if there is litigation on any plan?
Yes, I think it weighs very heavily. At least, unless what I heard here in the course of 4 or 5 meetings was somehow staged for my benefit, which I don't think it was. I heard a lot of public comment, and it's on the record, and I would cite it in any testimony that I had to make. I'd say just listen to what the people said. Listen to what the African-American person who came to the mic said. Listen to what the Hispanic person who came to the mic said. Listen to what the white non-Hispanic person said. That was what I was taking into account, and I would regard that as certainly a noteworthy part of the, quote, totality of the circumstances that the Voting Rights Act refers to. Those were a significant part of the totality of the circumstances. I heard them, and they're on the record.
Thank you.
Alderman Lopez.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dr. Morrison, welcome to Waterbury. As you have noticed, once you are here, we kind of do not let you go, so we appreciate your time. I think we have duly exhausted the scenarios in which we would need to defend or not the maps. I'd like to actually get some information on the process, how you feel about the entire process, the meetings, the timelines. I believe it was 4 meetings. I was here present for all of them. In your opinion, your expert opinion, please tell us about the fairness of the process, the lack of fairness. How do you feel about that?
I would say that, based on my experience, I've probably gone through a process like this with half a dozen communities, mostly in California, where it's typically Latino and non-Latino, and then maybe a little sprinkling of African American, Asian, but it's basically Latino, non-Latino. I would say that the process has been above average in terms of fulfilling what I see as my own narrow sense of what the people in this city really want, even though they may not see how my plan fulfills what they want. They may have misunderstood aspects of it, but I think it's above average. And I can only recall one instance in which it was quicker and easier, and it was a situation of a small California city where it was kind of a square boundary, you know, one of those cities embedded in Los Angeles County. It was pretty much square or rectangular. And the first meeting I came in and I said, well, you can take your city and you need to divide it into 4 districts. I said, you can divide it here and divide it here, and these are the numbers. And they said, okay, let's do that. I said, that's all you have to say? You don't have anything to fight about or argue about or disagree about? No. So, you know, judging against that theoretical standard, I would say you have not been that easy, but I would say in terms of whether the process has fulfilled what I think your objectives were, which is to empower voters across the city regardless of race and ethnicity. I think you've done a great job of informing me and redirecting me after the first meeting away from a narrow interpretation of, let me carve up your territory so it's in perfect accord with the theory of maximizing everybody, and I didn't realize that neighborhoods matter. So I'm pleased with the outcome. I'm pleased with the outcome if you adopt my plan, and I still would not be displeased if you adopted Mr. Butler's plan, although I don't think that would be my recommendation.
Okay. Going on that line, then, how was the tools? You know, did the city provide the tools that you needed, the staff that you needed, the support that you needed to get the job done?
Yes, they did, and I want to compliment everybody from the city who is involved in this, particularly your GIS person, whose name I'm blocking on now, who really was very responsive to what we needed. And also, I want you to understand that what happened here from mid-December to basically, what is it now, mid-February, is an extremely compressed time schedule. You know, that normally you don't get this much done in 8 weeks. It drags out over 6 months. I found the city very responsive. They followed my advice to a T in terms of public dissemination. I said, you want to get a website up where people who can't attend the meeting because they're working too hard or it's inconvenient can still see what's going on. They can follow what's happening. They can look at the maps. They can actually view the video of the meeting. They can see pretty much what's going on from their home computer. And if they're interested, they can come and voice their opinions. And that, to me, is a very important thing to do. And that's kind of a model that I use in other places to say, this is not a closed process. There was not a smoke-filled room into which people went and formed a plan, which is what you see in places like Chicago. This is an open process, and people expressed what they felt, and I was guided by it. And I think, you know, the process was greatly facilitated by the city staff, including your attorney, your counsel, who really made things happen on a kind of a frightening schedule. You know, we cranked up just during the middle of December and had people working, I think, into the Christmas holidays to get all the stuff set up, and we were up live and running, I think, in time for the first meeting.
When we consider that time frame that you have just alluded to, the close proximity of the meetings, the intense process, did that prevent you in any way from successfully providing us with a map that you feel is the best map for the city of Waterbury?
No, it did not. And the reason it didn't was partly good luck, because what I like to see happen is I like to go in and say, well, here's the man from Mars view, and then I like to get some critical comment and say, oh, don't do it that way. We'd like you to start looking at these things. And then you gradually converge over time and you keep moving in that direction. The worst outcome is to have spent 3 or 4 weeks moving in that direction and then have someone say, oh, that's all wrong, I want you to start over and do something else, because then the process drags on forever. And of course, we have a deadline here. I mean, we've got to get something adopted in time to hold an election, so there is to some extent a time constraint. But I would say through a combination of good luck and being able to turn things around fast with the help of the city, we were able to get into that final glide path like the airplane landing. You say, don't pull up the last minute and turn around again because you're going to run out of fuel. Just try to bring it in for a landing and recognize that you've done the best you can. And I think the plan that you're going to go forward with at this particular point in time, 2015, is again fortuitous because you're going to have a chance to see how it works over a half a decade. And then when you come back, you're going to have to come back in 5-6 years and say, well, we got to fine tune this. How do we like how it's worked? What is the history of how the elections have gone? What kinds of new things are we seeing happening in this city with the new form of elections that we have? And in a sense, you're running an experiment, but it's an experiment that holds considerable promise, and you hope it will prove out to be something that people will look at it 5, 6, 7 years from now and say, you know, I wasn't completely satisfied at the time, but it looks like it's working. That's my hope. And if it's not working, we'll come back and repair it after the 2020 census.
I think we'll hold on to your contact information up in Nantucket just in case we got to get you back down. Is it safe to assume that the same confidence that you have if we needed to defend the maps or the final map, that same confidence that you have, is it safe to assume that you have the same confidence in defending the process?
Oh, absolutely. I think I have more confidence in defending the process here than I have. The confidence that I have in the process here is equal to any other place I've done it and probably exceeds it anywhere else. I would have, not that my confidence in the process matters in a court of law if there's a plaintiff there, but if the judge asked me, how did you feel about it, I would say, I thought it went really well. And I'd ask the judge how many hours he wanted to listen to the people speaking at the mic in the first 4 or 5 meetings and make one's own judgment about whether this plan reflects what they were asking me to do within the limits of what I have to do under the Voting Rights Act. So I'm very happy with it.
Excellent. I just have a question pertaining to the coalition that you alluded to. I believe that would be regarding District Number 2.
Yes.
Is that, are the numbers as they stand, that they formed a coalition, was that a way that you kind of looked at making it happen, or did that just the way that it happened?
It was really the way it happened. The numbers came out this way, and I then looked at it and I said, gee, it's interesting, 30.5 for each group. One could make the case that that's a good outcome. It really was a complete statistical accident. It's a function of what I was trying to do, putting the neighborhoods together the way I did it. It came out that way. I didn't do it intentionally, but when I saw it, I said, I'm not going to touch this plan. I'm going to leave it just the way it is, because if it was 30.6 and 30.4, it wouldn't be quite as nice. I like the sort of the balance there. And that's the point at which I think it was that week when I was forming this plan and I recognized that there was this coalitional possibility. I called around and asked a few people about, without saying what I had, I just wanted to know, do they think that there are coalitions forming around one or another minority candidate getting elected, and does it ever happen? And I was hoping the answer would not be, no, that never happens here. The answer was, yeah, it happens. And I said, does it? And then somebody, I think, pointed to a few instances of it. I said, as long as there are some demonstrable instances of it that I could point to if I had to, And I think, if I recall correctly, Mr. Butler's election is one of them. And then there was in this last round, I'm not sure who it was, but an Hispanic candidate was elected. So the important point that proves is it demonstrates a concept which we talk about, which is you have a piece of territory, and it may not be a majority Hispanic or a majority black district or piece of territory, but if it elected a black or an Hispanic, you say that's a district that has the ability to elect. Right. And the ability to elect comes about through some combination of turnout by minority voters and also non-minority voters who are responding to what the candidate is offering them, not to the color of his skin. And that's what I like to see happen. I like to see evidence of that. When you see a total absence of that happening, which is what we see sometimes in some California cities, where there is never any opportunity for an Hispanic to get elected by attracting a significant crossover vote from any other group, that's a bad thing under the Voting Rights Act, because that says that there is block voting against Hispanics. Right. And what I like to see is evidence that refutes that assertion. So a plaintiff trying to establish that and say, well, you know, under the Voting Rights Act, block voting, I say, well, we see elections here in this place that contradict your assertion that there's block voting. How could there have been block voting if this candidate got elected in a district where only, let's say, 30 or 40% of the voters were Hispanic, and yet the Hispanic got elected, or the black candidate got elected? How could that have happened without crossover voting? When you have evidence of that, then the judge looks at it and says, in this particular city, elections are working such that there is crossover voting, and that demonstrates an absence of the things that the Voting Rights Act is designed to cure.
Two more questions, and that's
Sure.
it. And about 109,000 people plus will hear about this tomorrow and the weeks upcoming. I don't know if you will be able to answer I would like you to answer in a yes or no, if you're kind enough, but I'll leave that up to you. I'd like to ask you, if the Board of Aldermen decides to move with Morrison Plan number 3, move that plan forward, the map forward, would you be able to, and I want to say it the way I wrote it, defend that map and that as proposed?
Yes, exactly as proposed.
Thank you. The last one is, if the Board of Aldermen decides to move forward with the Butler plan, would you be able to defend that plan as proposed?
I could do my best to defend it, but it would put me in an awkward position, because I would have to somehow acknowledge, if not explain, why my plan was not the plan chosen. I mean, Mr. Butler's plan certainly is not without merit, but it puts me in an awkward position, because from a plaintiff's standpoint, they could say the plan that your expert that you retained and who spent a lot of time and said, this is the one I'm most comfortable defending, you rejected that plan, didn't you, in favor of some other plan? And then I could say, well, the other plan, is not really all that bad. Let me tell you about the good points of it. But nonetheless, I'm still in the position of the plaintiff saying, but nonetheless, it was not the plan you chose. So it puts you in an awkward position, and it certainly does not strengthen Mr. Casagrande's request for a summary judgment. It weakens the grounds for that.
Outstanding. Thank you so very much. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Any Alderman Padula?
Thanks, Mr. President. Dr. Morrison, first I'd like to thank you for your presentation and also for all your hard work in this endeavor.
Thank you.
I know it's been a very condensed time period also. For the record, my first name is Jerry, and like you, I am adamantly opposed to the term gerrymandering, just so you know.
Okay.
This is especially true since I actually don't believe in the district election system for this city. I've always thought that our limited vote system of at-large elections with the minority political protection built in was really the way to go, and I think it served us well and allowed for a balanced debate of the issues without regard to where people live or where they work or whatever individual district lines are being drawn. But I think no matter how we slice up the city, the elections are still going to be very interesting, and people here who've been through the election process know what I'm talking about here in Waterbury. I'd also like to thank you for recognizing the preeminent importance of the neighborhoods in the city. I think coming in from your perspective with all the federal rules that we have to follow as far as Voting Rights Act, the 14th Amendment, et cetera, importing all those literal rules on the city of Waterbury would cripple it and destroy it. So I think the way you've gone about it is produced about the best situation that we can as far as recognizing the importance of the neighborhoods. I only have one simple yes-no question for you. That is, after all your analysis of the city and the maps and the demographics and talking to people, studying some of the elections, could you tell at this point, with just a yes-no answer, where the Italian Americans live in Waterbury?
No, I can't. I have no idea.
Thank you.
Further questions? No? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So that leaves us with the next item, which is discussion and potential action on the establishment of the districts. What is your pleasure? Is there a motion with respect to the plans before us? Alderman Padula?
Mr. President, given that we've had maybe 30 speakers here this evening, there was some interest from the couple different neighborhood groups about the specific lines in the Morrison plan and also in Representative Larry Butler's plan. I think it's best if we table this until our next meeting and give it some thought and also go through the maps ourselves to see if we wanted to make any changes, which are also part of the charge that was given to us and put in the charter. Our board is actually able to make changes. Whether or not we want to do that, at least now we have all the information and data before us to make that choice. So I would just make a motion to table till our next meeting.
There's a motion to table that's been seconded. I don't believe it is open to discussion. The only point I would make, and I appreciate your point very much about what we can do going forward, is that obviously there are a lot of different pieces that come together here, and I would just caution trying to make some changes without having it run through the demographer or the attorney at some point, just to understand the consequences if there is a desire to make changes when we come back next Monday, or a week from Monday, I guess, is our next meeting. So is that the motion then is to table this until the next meeting, which is the 9th? Is it the 9th? The 9th, okay. Is there any discussion? I believe there can't be any. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Then the matter is tabled until the next meeting. Being that this is a special meeting, nothing else can happen. Is there a motion?
Second.
All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you.